We heard yesterday that the World Economic Forum considers inequality, wealth and income inequality, is one of the biggest threats to economic security in the globe. And I think that that's really a context that we need to be addressing in our work, because it's just as true here as in Canada and in Cape Breton as it is in Brazil or anywhere else. And we need to have an analysis about why inequality is growing. And one of the key reasons that Jan Flora mentioned it this morning is financialized capital. The financialized capital sector is in a desperate race to the bottom, driving us and our prosperity downwards in a global race to the bottom, and essentially sucking wealth out of our bank accounts and our households and our communities to benefit that financialized capital sector, ably abetted and aided by governments that have deregulated that sector and have also then imposed austerity measures on us to make us pay for the failings of that financialized capital sector. So what I would suggest is that in that setting, we really do need to have a focus on systems change at different levels. And just to make it a bit more concrete, on Vancouver Island, what we've had over the last 30, 40 years is industrial resource extraction, which has benefited the financialized capital sector, but has left almost no benefits to local First Nations and local communities that have done the work. And now, of course, those resources are depleted and our ecosystems have been ruined. And so they now move on to other lucrative sources of resources that they can extract for their purposes. And our economy on Vancouver Island goes down, just as it has gone down here in Cape Breton. And what we see physically as a consequence is people's livelihoods no longer being sustainable in resource and First Nations communities around Vancouver Island, and people drifting in to the metropolitan area, trying desperately to find some way of keeping going, and rapidly falling into poverty and homelessness and social disadvantage. And those circumstances then kind of hitting us on the street in downtown Victoria, becoming very much more evident as that inequality grows and more people are caught in the trap, spiral downwards. And then people saying, how do we do? What are we going to do about this? Because the streets of our lovely city are no longer very pleasant to walk down. So in that kind of circumstance, our focus in my organisation really has been about, how do we change the system in ways that we have some kind of control over? And let's stop doing these fragmented individual projects. Let's stop just doing that. We need to keep having projects that offer hope and opportunity. We need to keep building enterprises and building programs that offer people pathways to self-determination. But we can't just do that. We can't just do these individual projects. We have to look at system change. We have to be part of the broader advocacy movement that gives voice to the need for global change towards a people, community, and earth-centered economy. I really like that kind of way of framing it. It's come really straight out of the mouths of the movements in Brazil and Bolivia and places like that, Latin American movements, which I think have been much crisper at articulating a vision of what needs to happen. So what we're doing locally in terms of trying to build that kind of way of working is we're looking at how do we socially purpose the economy. Not just how do we create projects, but how do we actually social purpose the economy? And part of the answer, we think, is in building collective infrastructure that are the engines of change. And so what does that mean? What does that infrastructure look like? Well, it's partly space. It's partly creating physical space that can be the sites of convergence of innovation for change. So the Holy Angels project that New Dawn is working on is an example of creating space for social innovation, creativity, and working together. Because that's the legacy we have of the last 20, 30 years, is this individualization and fragmentation of effort. So what we now have to do is create a new commons that is the space for that kind of collaboration and reciprocation in creating new opportunity that is community controlled, that is collectively owned. So that's in Victoria, that's what we're doing. We're investing with a congregation, with a faith-based organization, in repurposing Holt site, which obviously has a diminished congregation, so is underutilized, to be a center for social innovation and social entrepreneurship. And we're seeing these kinds of new uses of real estate as an asset for collective generation of opportunities cropping up all over the place. The Social Innovation Centre in Toronto, the Hive in Vancouver. This is, seems to be a movement around taking back space and land for common purpose to benefit community. And what we find as well is that the people, that just as New Dawn's finding, I think, with the Holy Angels project, is people are banging on the door. There is this convergence around wanting to work together and wanting to innovate. But it's not just about buildings and space. It's also about programmatic responses. So it's building technical assistance systems that help people move through different phases of social entrepreneurship and social innovation. It's building training opportunities, often built on peer learning models, whereby people are learning as they do. It's about mentoring, building mentoring systems to help a younger generation of leaders come through. And it's about finance, the Community Investment Fund, the SEDIF, kind of repatriating those retirement savings plan accounts, repatriating sources of capital for community benefit. I think it's also about presenting a very distinct ethical component of the economy as an alternative for consumers, for the public, to choose to buy goods and services. In South America, it's a very strong fair trade movement that isn't just focused on export. It's focused on the domestic economic market. So you can walk into any major city in Peru and there'll be a fair trade center that will be the focus for the solidarity economy, that is where you can purchase either wholesale or retail all the fair trade produce that the Fair Trade Association in Peru is involved with. So it's actually taking over parts of the economy and making them ethical, making them socially purposed, and branding them so that consumers can vote with their wallets to support a different type of economy. The other thing that I think is really important that we're trying to work on is education, and we're very inspired by what's happened in Brazil. In Brazil, one of the edicts that the federal government secretariat for the solidarity economy came up with was that every publicly funded post-secondary institution must, as a condition of their federal funding, provide an incubation space, a training space, an education space for practitioners in the solidarity economy. And so what's happened is that in every state in Brazil, that you'll find universities actively partnering with solidarity economy organizations, community economic development organizations, to help them with the kinds of learning and training needs they have, the research and development needs they have, but then also educating a new generation of students to be the next leadership of the solidarity economy organizations in Brazil. So we're working with our post-secondary institutions on Vancouver Island with a similar purpose in mind, a research, development and learning agenda for the social economy and for CED on Vancouver Island. The final thing is a lesson that I've learned is the importance of having a practice and theory of movement building. As I said earlier, one of the big struggles is the fragmentation of people who are working in our sector. and for the fact that many of them don't know that they really are part of a distinct sector of the economy. And the lesson really in Quebec and Brazil, are two primary examples, is that they really have paid attention to self-identity of being a unique and different and socially purposed sector of the economy that should be taking over more and more of the production of goods and services to rebalance the economy to be more people and community centered. And what we find is that means that you have to develop a concentration on how you act as a connector, a linker, and a convener. And those are functions that people need to think through and define and build into their practice in every stage of their work, because that's the way that you start then to generate. You start to create the spaces and the opportunities for people to build their own identity as being part of the movement for social and economic change through all the little ways that they can do that, whether they're running their own, a two-person social enterprise, or whether they're part of a large institution that can change its procurement practices to benefit disadvantaged residents and disadvantaged communities. And then a final quote that I want to use from Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations: "The next great world superpower will be civil society." And I think that's the final lesson learned, that in addition to movement building amongst us CD and social economy folk, there's a bigger agenda around rebalancing power in favor of civil society that's democratically controlled by people and communities for human benefit. And I think that's what we have to keep our eyes on. That's where the hope lies in the future for Cape Breton, for Vancouver Island, and for many other places. Thank you.